And the third and final aesthetic that I picked was pop surrealism, or lowbrow. So that's a lot of text, am I right? So it basically blends surrealism with pop art. Pop artists in the 50s and 60s, they took a new attitude towards the art object. They had kind of this new acceptance of mass media images as art, and they looked outwards into the world, finding imagery in modern life instead of the total inwardness of their abstract expressionist predecessors from the Aldrich, I don't know. That was the source. That wasn't part of the quote. And then surrealist artists, as I educated you on prior, they were concerned with the reality of the unconscious mind. So if you take them together, put them together, pop surrealist movement flipped traditional hierarchies upside down, mixing high and low to displace conventional roles in art, as its predecessors did. And the pop surrealists looked deep into the representation of contemporary culture, taking the cartoons, films, toys, television, computers, and advertisements, and mutating them with a surrealist's eye. So it's kind of like millennials before there were millennials. So, pop surrealism was a rebellion against elites and high art. It was this surreal dream world that meets cartoons, toys, commerciality. That's just kind of like a summary of the last slide. And it introduced low art into a gallery space, like a high art world, hence the lowbrow naming. And I think it's an interesting juxtaposition of low art and high art with this guy. So that's cool. It started in LA in the 60s through the 90s. That's when I'd say like the first era of the art movement was. And it started as an underground movement rooted in a whole lot of influences. 1950s and 60s hot rod and surf culture like Von Dutch and Ed Big Daddy Roth, cool names. And underground comics with an X, they were pretty inappropriate. So maybe don't look this up if you're on your mom's computer. But Robert Crumb, S. Clay Wilson, Robert Williams, these fellas poked fun at popular conventions through humor, sarcasm, and cartoon characters. And they weren't perceived as highbrow artists, really. And other influences were street art, pop culture, and punk, kind of just modern LA stuff at the time. And for the sake of the presentation, I'll refer to this like come up era as the lowbrow period of all of that shit. And then I'd say it was followed by this pop surrealist period, which is more like today's movement. And all of that, I had this one source that was this Frank Kirkovich video on YouTube that I link at the end. I kind of took his naming structure for the greater movement, and that was a super good video. Pulled a lot of good stuff from. So early on, like I said, was the lowbrow part, and Robert Williams was, my brain is gassed because I'm now realizing that the reason I mentioned that was I think it's somewhat subjective. I don't know, I think if you just Google lowbrow, you might find a bunch of pictures of pop surrealist art, and if you look up pop surrealism, you might find a bunch of stuff that's like Von Dutch and the Rat Fink guy. So yeah, I don't know, maybe it's, I don't know, who knows. But early on stuff, lowbrow. This guy, Robert Williams, was an underground cartoonist, and he mixed all types of lowbrow's influences, that LA stuff. And then this guy, Gary Panter, was another pioneering cartoonist that kind of helped define alternative comics altogether. And then over the years, there was kind of this growing movement of artists who were on the fringe of the art world, and they were gaining popularity with everyday people. That's a quote that I stole from the video, so I didn't steal it, I cited it. But that's lowbrow art. And Rob Williams ends up starting this thing called Juxtapose magazine in 1994, which firmly plants the aesthetic into culture. That's where the video that I watched kind of credits the idea of lowbrow becoming planted into like a gallery setting, which is where that juxtaposition, it's called Juxtapose magazine, isn't that cool? But juxtaposition of low art and high art, low art being viewed as this big prestigious art thing, despite being accessible to just everyday, Joes on the street. So yeah, it gave visibility, it justified this kind of art, and it freed it from the rules of what art should look like. And then there was also this magazine called High Fructose in 2005 that was kind of like a more modern rendition of what Juxtapose did, where we're like continuing to push this aesthetic into the mainstream, the lamestream. So then later on, the pop surrealism side of the aesthetic. So lowbrow artists, they were featured in magazines and they'd start to kind of mature, grow, develop, and define their craft. So something interesting started happening where they would start to put their trained art backgrounds to use while not fully abandoning like the lowbrow roots and imagery. So you started getting more of a weird cross between that high art and low art stuff. Lowbrow was initially much more raw, self-taught, and like counterculture-esque, edgy, super cool. And then there was kind of this shift towards the more dreamy, sophisticated imagery. I'd almost say it feels like the surrealist side of things really got a boost. So hence the name pop surrealism. Yeah. So the aesthetic kind of starts to blur the divide between low art and high art, using high art techniques and lowbrow headspaces, and the use of pop icons. The battery died on my mic, so now I'm switching to probably worse mic. So the use of pop icons to convey social and political messages, often with some satire, kind of like political cartoons, but with like a weird high art style, which you'll see here in a second. And the term pop surrealism would get coined by the artist Kenny Scharf, and it appeals to a pop audience with its elements of traditional painting, pop culture, satire, weirdness, graffiti, and skate culture. Wow, so many cool things. So pop surrealism, lowbrow, has all types of recognizable examples of this aesthetic. Lowbrow roots are pretty much historically cemented at this point, I would say, if you ask me about it. And pop surrealism is both planted in history, but also still alive and strong. So here's some lowbrow stuff. I feel like the Von Dutch eyeball and the rat guy, those are pretty known visuals. And then pop surrealism, the more like alive and strong part that I'd say. I don't mean to say lowbrow stuff is dead and unwell, but I don't know. It's more of a historical aesthetic, I would say. Is that assuming? So pop surrealism stuff. Here's a piece by Todd Shore, which has the like political cartoon vibe. You can look up his stuff. He definitely is what I'm referring to when I say like weird mix between classical paintings and political cartoons. There'd be like weird, evil Mickey Mouse cursed that's like shooting laser beams at Trump or something. Very interesting stuff. This guy, Mike Ryden, I'd say he's maybe the most recognizable, he's probably got the most recognizable artwork of the pop surrealists. He's got these like doll-esque, I don't know if that's like Victorian or something. I'm not classically trained, but he got pretty famous for this style of art. And I actually recognized him because this band called Jack Off Jill in the 90s, they actually had him paint an album cover for them. And they're super cool. You should check them out. But yeah, strange, weird baby face people. And then there's Takashi Murakami, who's probably pretty well known. More modern. We're kind of getting more modern as we go this way. So if you walk with me to the rest of the stuff, there's Off the Air, which was a cool show on Adult Swim, and Brat by Charlie XCX. So I think the Off the Air stuff is really cool for like, I keep saying the word modern, but especially modern, like more recent, pulling like the direct visual aesthetic influences of pop surrealism. And it's cool that it was on Adult Swim on like a broadcast that still has notoriety probably today. And then Brat, I think I mentioned in a different video, but pretty interesting high art versus low art stuff, conceptually influenced by pop surrealism, I would say. So briefly, pop surrealism, 3 characteristics: cartoon/toy, commerciality, and playful versus eerie. And 3 characters: cartoonist/publicist Robert Williams, who people say is the godfather of lowbrow art, and painter Mark Ryden, who people say is the godfather of pop surrealism. I wonder if they're buddies. And Japanese artist Takashi Murakami, because I just wanted to put someone else that was more, doing the stuff today. So here's my sources. Yeah, these fellas carried, so you could go check out them. Okay, that's all I have.